3 Minnesota members of Congress are calling for action. That's after they say they were denied access to the federal facility where ICE is working at and bringing people to. Democratic U.S. Representatives Ilhan Omar, Angie Craig, and Kelly Morrison say they were turned away after entering the Whipple federal building for an oversight visit. WCCO's Adam Duxter has the latest from Fort Snelling.
Make some space.
Make a hole, please.
Surrounded by a crowd of media members and activists, U.S. Reps Ilhan Omar, Angie Craig, and Kelly Morrison came face to face with the line of federal agents before asking to be led inside the Whipple Federal Building at Fort Snelling. Inside, they say they intended to tour the facility, used as a hub for the 2,000 federal agents in town and the temporary home for many under arrest. The trio also requested a face-to-face meeting with ICE's acting director for the area. 20 minutes later, they returned.
Shortly after we were let in, two officials came in and said that they received a message that we were no longer allowed to be in the building and that they were rescinding our invitation to come in and declining any further access to the building. What happened today is a blatant attempt to obstruct members of Congress from doing their oversight duties.
The three told reporters the reason they were told to leave was because funding for the Operations Center came from the Big Beautiful Bill, not the Congressional Appropriations Bill. They say they were told that limits their congressional oversight abilities. The three were adamant this is not a sufficient explanation. DHS, however, Saturday painting a much different picture, saying in a statement they'd already notified the three their visit was out of compliance with existing court orders that mandate members of Congress to notify ICE at least 7 days in advance of a congressional visit.
We let ICE know, Department of Homeland Security know, that they were violating federal law. They do not care that they are violating federal law.
Three calling the moment political retribution.
We need a pause on ICE operations in Minnesota. After the killing of Renee Good, we need a pause. Minnesotans don't want ICE here right now, but we need a thorough and transparent investigation to transpire.
Adam Duxter, WCCO News.
This weekend, tens of thousands of Americans marched in over 1,000 protests demanding justice for Renee Nicole Good. And why they were marching, Kristi Noem was busy making sure Congress couldn't investigate what happened to her. Here's the cover-up happening in real time. On Saturday, January 10th, tens of thousands of people filled the streets of Minneapolis. Over 1,000 protests were organized nationwide. Texas, Kansas, New Mexico, Ohio, Florida, New York, Portland, Chicago, Los Angeles. This is a movement that's growing, not shrinking. And Minnesota Governor Tim Walz made it official. He proclaimed January 9th as, quote, Renee Good Day, end quote. A state government honoring the woman the federal government shot. Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey said something important on Friday, quote, we are standing up to Donald Trump's chaos, not with our own brand of chaos, but with care and unity, end quote. And that's exactly what we saw. Yes, there were 30 arrests Friday night for property damage, but out of tens of thousands of people in the streets, that's 99.9% peaceful. Compare that to ICE, which shot an unarmed woman through her car window. Who's actually violent here? The march in Minneapolis was led by a large bird puppet from In the Heart of the Beast Theater. That's iconic Minneapolis protest imagery. The crowd gathered at the Bishop Henry Whipple Federal Building. That's the ICE processing center where detainees are held. And they marched to downtown hotels where ICE agents have been staying. Schools in Minneapolis extended closures through the end of the week, with online options through February 12th because of ongoing safety concerns and community trauma. This is the fifth death tied to Trump's immigration enforcement operations since he took office 2 weeks ago. Let that sink in. 5 deaths in 2 weeks. Chicago, Minneapolis, Other cities where details are still emerging. Each death adds to the protests. Each death builds the movement. This is not an isolated incident. This is a pattern of violence. Now, while tens of thousands of Americans were demanding answers in the streets, Kristi Noem was working very hard to make sure they don't get those answers. Let me walk you through the timeline of this cover-up, because the timing tells you everything you need to know. December 17th, 2025. Federal Judge Gia Cobb issues a court order blocking Noem's policy that required 7 days advance notice for congressional visits to ICE facilities. The judge's ruling was clear. Congress has a constitutional right to conduct unannounced oversight visits. There's a 2020 federal law that says the Department of Homeland Security cannot use funds to prevent members of Congress from entering facilities or require prior notice. Judge Cobb said Noem's policy violated that law. Case closed. January 7th, 2026. ICE agent Jonathan Ross shoots Renee Nicole Good in Minneapolis. Ross filmed himself doing it on his personal cell phone. Good's last words were, quote, "That's fine, dude. I'm not mad at you," end quote. She was calm. She was cooperative. She explicitly de-escalated, and Ross shot her anyway while filming with one hand. January 8th, 2026. That's the next day, less than 24 hours after ICE shot Renee Good. Kristi Noem issues a secret directive requiring 7 days advance notice for congressional visits to ICE facilities. The exact same policy a federal judge had blocked 3 weeks earlier. But Noem found a loophole. She claimed that because ICE facilities are now funded through the, quote, One Big Beautiful Bill Act, end quote, which Congress passed last summer, those facilities are exempt from the 2020 law that guarantees congressional oversight. Let me explain this legal shell game. The court said Noem can't use DHS funds to block Congress from entering facilities. So Noem said, fine, I'm not using DHS funds. I'm using One Big Beautiful Bill funds. Those are different. The court order doesn't apply. Never mind that the One Big Beautiful Bill appropriated $75 billion to ICE, which is part of DHS. Never mind that this money was appropriated by Congress to the Department of Homeland Security. Noem is claiming it's a different pot of money, so different rules apply. If this argument works, any federal agency could evade congressional oversight just by switching which appropriation they claim is funding a particular facility. It would be the end of accountability. Congress would be powerless to conduct surprise inspections of anything. But Noem doesn't care about that. She needed a way to block oversight immediately, the day after ICE killed Renee Good, and this was the loophole she found. January 10th, 2026, Saturday. 3 Minnesota congresswomen decide to exercise their constitutional oversight authority. Representative Ilhan Omar from Minnesota's 5th District, Representative Angie Craig from Minnesota's 2nd District, Representative Kelly Morrison from Minnesota's 3rd District. They go to the Bishop Henry Whipple Federal Building in Minneapolis, the same ICE processing center where protesters were gathering. The same facility that's at the center of this entire controversy. And here's what happened. Initially, they were allowed in. They entered the facility. They began their oversight duties. They saw 20 detained people. And then they were told to leave, mid-visit, kicked out, denied access to complete their constitutional oversight responsibilities. Why? According to the facility staff, because this facility is funded by the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, not the Congressional Appropriations Act. The congresswomen were not allowed to enter without 7 days advance notice. Noem's secret directive from January 8th was being enforced. 2 days after she issued it, it was already being used to obstruct Congress. Representative Angie Craig had some choice words about this. Quote, ICE Barbie, Secretary Noem, she has told this agency to go rogue, to not follow the law, and frankly, that's exactly what we experienced inside this detention center today. End quote. ICE Barbie. Let that sink in for a moment. Representative Craig is not a member of the squad. She's a moderate Democrat from a suburban district. She's not known for inflammatory rhetoric. And she just called the Secretary of Homeland Security, ICE Barbie, and accused her of telling the agency to go rogue and not follow the law. When moderate Democrats are using language like that, you know something has gone seriously wrong. Craig also said, quote, we were told because this facility is being funded by the one big beautiful bill, not the Congressional Appropriations Act, that we would not be able to enter the facility, end quote. She was told this to her face by federal employees who were enforcing Noem's directive that a federal judge had already ruled unconstitutional. Representative Ilhan Omar called it what it is. Quote, what happened today is a blatant attempt to obstruct members of Congress from doing their oversight duties, end quote. She also said, quote, it looked like it might have been an order that maybe came from Washington to deny us the proper access, end quote. She's deliberately qualifying her language there, but the implication is crystal clear. This wasn't a decision made by some local facility manager in Minneapolis. This came from the top, from Noem, from DHS headquarters in Washington. The DHS spokesperson, Tricia McLaughlin, tried to defend this. She claimed, quote, a previous court order stated that funding appropriated to DHS by Congress cannot be used to prevent members of Congress from entering facilities. However, the court also ruled that funding derived from the One Big Beautiful Bill Act is exempt from this limitation, end quote. That's a lie. Judge Cobb did not rule that One Big Beautiful Bill funds are exempt. The judge blocked Noem's notice requirement, period. McLaughlin is inventing a legal interpretation the judge never made. She's gaslighting the public by claiming the court approved something the court specifically prohibited. Let's talk about the timing here, because the sequence of events tells you everything. January 7th, ICE shoots Renee Good. January 8th, Noem blocks congressional oversight. January 9th, Governor Walz proclaims Renee Good Day. January 10th, congresswomen get kicked out and tens of thousands march nationwide. If the shooting was justified, why block the investigation immediately? If there's nothing to hide, why reimpose a policy a federal judge blocked just 3 weeks earlier? If ICE agents followed proper procedures, why prevent Congress from inspecting the facility where it happened? The answer suggested by her behavior is clear. Her actions are consistent with someone who has seen Ross's cell phone video and understands what it shows. Her actions are consistent with someone who recognizes that if Congress gets into that facility and starts talking to witnesses and reviewing records and asking questions, the federal narrative becomes very difficult to sustain. So she acted fast. The very next day, found a legal loophole, issued a secret directive, and when 3 congresswomen showed up to do their jobs, she had them thrown out. This pattern of behavior is what legal experts describe as consciousness of guilt. This is what a cover-up looks like when it's happening in real time. And we can see every step of it. Now let me tell you what else is happening. The Department of Homeland Security is cutting short its Louisiana operation, which was supposed to run through February, and shifting those resources to Minneapolis. Noem claims there are now over 2,000 agents deployed to the Twin Cities in what she's calling the, quote, largest ICE operation ever, end quote. over 1,500 arrests in the first week. And while Louisiana was a cooperative red state where ICE faced little resistance, Minneapolis is a blue city with a progressive mayor and sanctuary policies. The priority shift is obvious. Noem is punishing resistance. She's doubling down after killing Renee Good. More agents, more arrests, more force. And here's the complete checklist of what Noem has done to cover up Good's killing. The FBI blocked Minnesota's state investigation by revoking the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension's access to evidence. Noem issued a secret directive the day after the shooting, reimposing oversight restrictions a court had blocked. She kicked congresswomen out mid-visit when they tried to inspect the facility. She claimed a funding loophole to bypass the court order. She controlled the narrative by getting the federal story out first, calling it a weaponized vehicle before anyone could contradict her. She engaged in character assassination, with Trump calling Good a, quote, professional agitator, end quote, and Noem calling her a domestic terrorist. And Good received no medical aid for 15 minutes after being shot, a delay that remains unexplained and has raised serious concerns among medical and legal experts about emergency response protocols. Every single one of those actions suggests the same conclusion. This is the pattern experts associate with consciousness of guilt. If this shooting was justified, the expected response would be to welcome investigation. You cooperate with Congress. You provide evidence to state investigators. You give medical aid immediately. You don't do any of this. The systematic obstruction raises profound questions about what actually happened. Now, conservatives are going to make some predictable arguments. They'll say the congresswomen were grandstanding, that Omar, Craig, and Morrison just wanted headlines, that they didn't give proper notice and violated procedure. But the court ruled that unannounced visits are allowed. That's the whole point. Congress has constitutional oversight authority. And if there's nothing to hide, why kick them out mid-visit after they'd already seen 20 detained people? What did they see that made DHS panic and expel them? They'll say the one big beautiful bill funding really is different and that DHS lawyers approved Noem's interpretation. But one big beautiful bill funds are still DHS funds. They were appropriated by Congress to the Department of Homeland Security. Judge Cobb's ruling applied to DHS blocking congressional access, period. She didn't carve out exceptions for different appropriation bills. Noem is engaging in legal gymnastics to evade a court order, and if this interpretation stands, any agency could bypass oversight by claiming a different funding source. It would gut congressional power entirely. They'll claim ICE has important work to do and can't be disrupted by congressional visits during an active operation. But we're talking about over 2,000 agents in Minneapolis. They can spare time for 3 congresswomen, and the security risk argument is nonsense. Congressional oversight happens all the time at sensitive facilities. What Noem is really protecting isn't security. It's accountability. They'll point to the 30 arrests Friday night and claim the protests are violent. But 30 arrests out of tens of thousands of people is overwhelmingly peaceful. And property damage, while illegal, is not violence against people. You know what is violence against people? An ICE agent shooting an unarmed woman through her car window. Mayor Frey's characterization of, quote, care and unity, end quote, is accurate. These protests have been remarkably disciplined given the circumstances. And they'll repeat the claim that Renee Good attacked the agent and that the shooting was self-defense. But we've been through this. Ross's own cell phone video contradicts that narrative. Experts like Professor Jeff Alpert said there's no training that permits filming with one hand while shooting with the other. Professor John P. Gross said if you genuinely view someone as a threat, you don't walk around their vehicle casually filming. CNN's 3D analysis debunked all three major DHS claims: that Good was blocking agents, that Ross feared for his life, and that Good tried to run him over. Good's last words were, quote, "I'm not mad at you," end quote. She was peaceful. The federal narrative has collapsed. So what happens next? The congresswomen may file a lawsuit to enforce their access rights and challenge Noem's one big beautiful bill loophole. That legal battle will likely favor Congress, but it takes time. Meanwhile, Noem continues blocking visits. The protests are growing. Schools remain closed through this week. Over 1,000 protests nationwide shows this movement has staying power. And DHS is doubling down, sending even more agents to Minneapolis while cutting the Louisiana operation short. In Congress, Representative Cori Bush's impeachment articles against Noem now have even more evidence. Obstruction of Congress is literally in the articles. Noem's action Saturday, kicking out 3 congresswomen mid-oversight, strengthened the case significantly. The resolution will gain more co-sponsors. It will be used in 2026 midterm campaigns. But with Republicans controlling the House, it won't pass right now. They're protecting her. However, if Democrats win the House in November 2026, everything changes. A new Congress convenes in January 2027. The Oversight Committee and Judiciary Committee restart investigations. Ross gets subpoenaed and has to testify under oath about why he was filming himself while shooting. The Minneapolis facility gets inspected over Noem's objections. Witnesses get interviewed without federal filters, and there could be criminal referrals to the Department of Justice, though any action would depend on who controls the executive branch at that point. Real accountability, if it comes, is years away. But here's what's happening right now. Renee Good's name is being honored by the state of Minnesota. Governor Walz proclaimed Renee Good Day. That's permanent. That's in the state's historical record. Trump called her a professional agitator. Noem called her a domestic terrorist. The state of Minnesota gave her a day. That tells you whose judgment history will vindicate. The video Ross filmed will be preserved as evidence. Not just evidence of what happened to Renee Good, but evidence of what happens when federal agents operate without meaningful oversight. An agent can film himself shooting an unarmed woman who's cooperating and explicitly de-escalating. Experts can analyze the footage and conclude the behavior is inconsistent with lawful self-defense. A major news network can create a 3D model debunking every federal claim. A city's mayor can call the official narrative bullshit, and the federal government can still block independent state investigations, kick out congressional oversight delegations, and follow the same pattern we've seen in case after case. Becca Good said they had whistles and the federal agents had guns. That's the asymmetry we're dealing with. Renee Good was exercising her First Amendment rights. She was supporting her neighbors. She was participating in her community. She had a whistle, and an Iraq War veteran with 20 years of federal law enforcement experience filmed himself walking up to her vehicle and shooting her through the window. And now, the day after that shooting, the Secretary of Homeland Security issued a secret directive blocking the one form of oversight that could have provided independent verification of what happened. When 3 congresswomen tried to exercise their constitutional authority, they got thrown out mid-visit. One of them, a moderate Democrat, called Noem ICE Barbie and said she told the agency to go rogue and not follow the law. And she's right. That's exactly what happened. This is why tens of thousands of people are in the streets. They're demanding answers. The government is actively hiding evidence. They're demanding accountability. The government is blocking every avenue of investigation. They're demanding justice. The government is covering up. And that juxtaposition, that contrast between the people in the streets and the government behind closed doors, tells you everything you need to know about whose side you should be on. If Noem had nothing to hide, she would welcome congressional oversight. She would cooperate with state investigators. She would provide evidence. She would answer questions. Instead, she's blocking, obstructing, hiding, and evading. The FBI won't let Minnesota examine the evidence. Noem won't let Congress inspect the facility. And the timeline shows this was coordinated. She didn't wait to see what Congress would do. She blocked them preemptively, the very next day, before they could even try. This behavior pattern is inconsistent with confidence in the agency's actions. This is the behavior pattern experts associate with someone who understands exactly what happened and recognizes it can't withstand scrutiny. So she's using every legal trick, every technicality, every loophole she can find to prevent that scrutiny from happening. And when 3 members of Congress showed up anyway, exercising their constitutional authority to conduct oversight, she had them removed in the middle of their visit, after they'd already started seeing detained people and asking questions. What were they about to find out? What did they see in those 20 detained people that made DHS decide they had to go immediately? Were any of them witnesses to what happened to Renee Good? Were they being held to prevent them from talking? Were conditions in that facility something Noem couldn't afford to have congresswomen document? We don't know, because she kicked them out before they could finish their work. But we know this: the cover-up is happening in real time. We can watch it unfold. December 17th, court blocks the policy. January 7th, ICE shoots Renee Good. January 8th, Noem reinstates the policy using a loophole. January 10th, congresswomen get expelled and tens of thousands march. Every step is documented. Every action raises serious accountability questions. And the movement in the streets is responding to exactly what they should be responding to: a government that uses lethal force against its own people and then blocks every avenue of independent investigation. Governor Walz proclaimed Renee Good Day because he understands what's at stake. This is about more than one shooting. This is about whether federal agents can operate above the law. It's about whether Congress can exercise oversight. It's about whether courts can enforce their orders. It's about whether the people have any recourse when their government kills them. And right now, the answer to all of those questions is no. Federal agents are operating above the law. Congress is being blocked from oversight. Courts are being circumvented through loopholes. And the people's only recourse is to fill the streets and demand change. So they are. Tens of thousands in Minneapolis. Over 1,000 protests nationwide. Schools closed because the community is traumatized and afraid. And they should be afraid. Because this is the 5th death in 2 weeks. Because the pattern is clear. Because every time it happens, the government covers it up. And because Kristi Noem just proved with her actions over these 4 days that she will do absolutely anything to prevent accountability for what her agency did to Renee Nicole Good. That's the story. That's what the timeline shows. That's what the cover-up proves. And that's why the people are marching.
Thanks for spending a few minutes digging into this with me. If you want more grounded, progressive commentary without the outrage bait, subscribe and stick around. Every time you watch, share, and engage, it helps build a community that believes democracy is worth understanding and defending. I'll see you in the next video.